we are going to be doing is we're having like a little bit of a debate, a little bit of a conversation around the pros and cons of adopting a national standard for case management right across the country. So we're going to do some pros, we're going to do some cons, but I want to like sort of maybe start by asking the audience, is anyone sort of on a pro, or is anyone across the room is an affirmative for adopting a national type capability standards for our industry? Hands up. Fantastic. Anyone for a no? Please, safe space. Yep, we've got some. That's great. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be having a conversation. We're going to be bringing some of this to life. Please make sure that you get your questions in so that we can do it. I just realised I was standing up, so I was just sitting down. Sorry. So what we've brought together is a really illustrious panel here to be able to come together and discuss the pros and cons. No throwing tables or chairs, Jerry Springer style, but still, we're going to keep it very professional. But nonetheless, we're going to be having this conversation. So I'm going to go through and introduce our panel here. To my right, we have Mariam. So Mariam's been awarded Passionate Leadership. Mariam is an educator, stakeholder relationship and operations specialist. Regularly leaning into all three of these specialist areas, Mariam has spent over 15 years implementing and embedding meaningful education in support of professional development and best practice. Her career is defined by enabling people to be their best. After working with Mariam over the last year in particular, I absolutely can attest to that. Mariam is currently leading the professional standards and capability development and delivery at icare. This program of work, known as the Professional Standards Framework, introduces a scheme-wide professional management professionals to provide consistent service delivery to drive return to work and recovery outcomes for injured workers and their employees. Next to Mariam, we have Declan. Declan Collins. So Declan joined Return to Work South Australia in August 2020. He has 20 years of experience working in statutory personal injury schemes in various jurisdictions across Australia. Prior to joining Return to Work SA, Declan spent 7 years overseeing large claims management operations in Victoria, South Australia, and New South Wales. Who do you barrack for in AFL?
Tigers.
Fantastic. Okay.
They played here in the weekend and lost. So.
Okay. Fantastic. So different roles including content audit manager, director of entitlements, investigations manager, and senior prosecutor. Next to Declan, we have Stephanie Connolly. Welcome, Stephanie. As general manager, Stephanie is responsible for managing a number of Gallagher Bassett's personal injury operations, as well as driving best practice and innovative solutions across Gallagher Bassett nationally. Stephanie has been part of both PIEF and APRA's national collaboration activities, and was named one of Insurance Business Australia's elite women in 2022. With 14 years in the industry, Stephanie has developed deep expertise in driving recovery and return to work, combining operational knowledge with thought leadership to optimise outcomes. Next to Stephanie, I'm sure a lot of people in the room know, we have Kim Birch. So Kim is South Australia's first CTP regulator, commencing July 2016. With the start of private underwriting of the compulsory third-party insurance scheme in South Australia. Kim's 40-plus, find that very hard to believe, Kim's 40-plus year career spans federal and state jurisdictions in the public and private sector in ranges of roles, including delivery, frontline services, designing and delivering systems for people with injury and disability, and designing CTP schemes and for regulating CTP insurers. And we had an amazing conversation around design yesterday, so I think we could have a whole hour just dedicated to good design as maybe another plenary for next year. And then finally, we have Joanne Zarb. Welcome. Joanne is an experienced general manager with a demonstrated history of working in the personal injury insurance industry, skilled in coaching, communication, conflict resolution, culture change, and facilitation. Maybe we should have swapped roles. Strong human resource professional with Masters of Management focused in personal injury from Deakin University. Joanne's focus is to develop our future leaders so we can together make a difference for those we're here to support. So thank you for writing those bios. I know it's you get up here and read, but a lot of time and effort goes into these, so I wanted to make sure that I gave it justice and did it justice. So look, this is going to be a debated topic that I think is going to be a continual source of conversation for our industry over many years to come. On the one hand, the needs and goals of injured people are relatively the same across all the schemes that we operate in. Know me, understand my context, give me access to services when I need them most. Make it easy and seamless to access those services. A consistent capability framework nationally will scale effective delivery of high-quality services to injured people. It'll allow our case managers to be able to move across jurisdictions and to be able to have career pathways that give the best for the people that deliver to everyone that are coming through our scheme. On the other hand, case management is the core value proposition of insurers and forms an essential ingredient of the insurer value proposition, the magic sauce, so to speak. So is there a risk of implementing frameworks that are consistent across the country that can potentially tap in and remove some of that competitive advantage? So these are things that we're going to be talking about as we go through some of these conversations. So why don't we kick it off? Because you're probably all sick of my voice already. So with a simple one, there may be a lot of people in this room going, what are we talking about with this thing called professional standards? Mariam, I might start with you. You've been living and breathing this for a number of years now. What are national standards?
Thanks, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for affording us your time. I know it's a very insightful but long couple of days, so we appreciate you coming along to this session. The concept of national standards is not a new one at all, and anybody who has been in the personal injury industry for a while will attest to numerous attempts at gathering our thoughts across jurisdictions and across different schemes to do our best to align best practice, because we all do have quite an altruistic vision of providing consistent service to those we serve, and those we serve are a great many audience. They are certainly our injured people, people that have become unwell through no fault of their own. And also, we still have those we serve. If you're a people leader, you're a business owner, those we serve absolutely comes into play, your employees, their well-being. And if we look at the themes that have emerged over the plenary sessions over the past couple of days, you see that there is quite a steel thread that runs through these, which talk about our ability to attract, to retain talent. What does it take for people to have a true sense of belonging? How is it that we have an industry with a high duty of care and yet what seems to be still quite a transient workforce, and what can we do to best support that in order to enable and empower the sustained service delivery that we're all seeking? So national standards as a concept is certainly not new. What is new perhaps is the progression that has occurred over the past 18 months, which has given us as an industry a decisive impetus to work from. Now, that impetus came from developing the professional standards framework from icare, and icare was afforded that opportunity essentially because it was given a recommendation that it ought to review its capability investment and see what it could do. It wasn't prescriptive. The review did not say, please establish a professional standards framework, but this was something that we saw is a gap across the New South Wales nominal insurer and Treasury managed fund schemes for workers' compensation. So we thought, let's try and do something meaningful. Let's do the deep work. And we did do the deep work. What we have done is establish an industry-led and designed professional standards framework, the premise of which is nothing happens about me without me. Now, the me, as I mentioned in the those we serve, is the injured person, and it is also our employees. So that deep work involved going to people who had claims, active claims, as well as people who had a claim experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and understanding from them, what is it that you liked about the service we provided you? What is it that you didn't like? What are the things that we have opportunities to do and to implement, not just the low-hanging fruit, not something that we could do and implement and then say, hey, fantastic, we've done something, we can see a result, however marginal that result may be, we have a positive shift, we can tick that box, we can move forward. We really wanted to get into the bones of what is an excellent claim experience, given that you are in a position of vulnerability. You are not calling us because something fabulous has happened in your life. And what is the sort of support that you really need from us? And that deep customer research, which wasn't just with injured people, but also with the ecosystem of that claim network. So think about providers, rehab specialists, doctors, etc. What is it that you need from us to deliver a good claim experience? And overwhelmingly, what we received as advice was, we want to feel heard, we want to feel collaborated with, we want to feel understood, we want to feel that you valued our time. These are the things that mattered. And this is congruent to what we've been hearing throughout the plenary sessions, which is this very consistent shift from the IQ into the EQ. The EQ matters. And because the EQ matters so much, in the structure of icare's professional standards framework, we have overarching commitments to our injured people. And they are, understand me, collaborate with me, value my time, empower me to make decisions about my recovery. And they bleed into all of the actions across our business, whether you're in workers' comp frontline or you are not. But it was important for us to build that in to the professional standard structure. Now, underpinning that structure, we needed to make sure that we consulted with the people on the ground that do the work. And not just doing the work in terms of icare's operational frontline landscape, which is narrow. We work as a scheme. We're one body with many parts. So we needed to make sure that we consulted with our many parts to understand, is this consistent for you, and for you, and for you, and what's happening over there? That means understanding the breadth of roles that exist. The professional standards framework is put together to help guide practice for 4 core functional roles. Now, I'm going to tell you the titles of these roles, and I understand that in your business, these titles may be a great varied thing. If I say case manager, you may say, well, I have a mobile claim advisor, I have a claim specialist, I have a fatality specialist, I have a work injury damages specialist, I have, yes. But at the crux of it, they are a case manager with niche applicabilities. You have a team leader. They may be called a service manager, but they are a team leader in the functional role that they deliver. And then you have your 2 supporting roles, technical specialists and injury management specialists. This is the diamond of the front line. And really at the core and the heart of that diamond is the case manager, and the other 3 roles are the case manager's supporting staff. So what are we doing to enable those 4 functional roles to be consistent in their service delivery? What are we doing as a business to support them? And so the structure of the professional standards framework contains 2 standards that are technically based in scheme regulation and holistic case management, and 4 standards that are based in the underpinning, enduring core values that you would expect an employee in our line of service to have, whether they are on front line, whether they are somewhere else. And these are positive connections, to talk to how we communicate with each other, to be empathic, to be transparent, to make the complex simple. We talk about business enablers, which are the systems, the tools, the processes that we have in our businesses to enable our front line to do the best job that they can do. We talk about empowered leadership. Leadership is a behaviour, so leadership absolutely carries into the case management role. It carries across those 4 roles. And we also have another one, which is bringing best self, which is more of a newer one. It's not something that has entered dialogue in a very specific, targeted way until this point. And this is really talking about knowing yourself, knowing self and triggers, having a psychologically safe workspace, understanding the resilience and the adaptability that is asked of these roles. We've talked time and time again in the plenaries about the vicarious trauma that our frontline staff are exposed to on a daily basis. How is it that we are supporting them, and how is it that they can support themselves? So with that in mind, icare had established these 6 standards in deep collaboration with frontline and with frontline across its entire scheme. And that is a frontline collaboration. It is a collaboration with learning and development staff across the scheme, and also with the operational staff that have to actually roll out and sustain such standards. Because too often we have a disparity between what we feel as an executive. This is an aspiration, this is wonderful, it is shiny, but it's not necessarily doable on the ground. And we wanted something that deeply aligned with what our people do organically on the ground every day. Part of this structure, and Pete from Gallagher Bassett had mentioned this the other day. He said we need transferable skills. We need people that can do their job with empathy and passion. But something else that Pete had said was that we can't just steal from each other. And I thought about that and I reflected on it, and I thought, and that is in itself a benefit of professional standards, because once you establish a common language and you establish a common assessment practice, and you know that we're all comparing apples with apples and we're using the same types of tasks and activities to have evidence-based assessment, we can then benchmark, and we can have credentialing against an industry-led and designed benchmark. And so instead of bleeding staff right out of our skill set in our scheme, we may have opportunities to port staff between each other openly so that we know exactly who we're getting, and we know exactly how they fit in with our culture, and we know how we can best service them as the individual so that we can sell those attraction strategies and those retention strategies, because we can say, hey, we're looking for somebody that is proficient at this level using a language that they understand across the country. This is invaluable. I'd also like to touch on something that Vicky had said in the attraction and retention plenary, the first plenary, which was about changing the paradigm to look through the employee lens and the employee experience, and making sure that we have got those broader opportunities to professionalise our industry. And part of the structure of the professional standards framework is not only this standardised assessment practice, but is also the HR side and having clear career journeys that marry up to those standards. The career journey aspect is not about having a Stepford Wives approach. It has to afford operational flexibility where our different companies have the opportunity to invest their corporate flavour, their corporate values to drive the cultural capability that we're looking for. All this industry benchmark is saying is that this is the minimum that we expect, and this is the way in which we would like to see our enterprise values played out very specifically on the front line. It gives it a language, it gives it scope, it gives it an assessment opportunity, it gives it an accreditation opportunity, which is part of that HR capability overarching strategy. So that is what we mean by what could a national standard look like. It could look like something everyone benefits from. It could look like something that everybody recognises. It could look like something that has been considered not as an add-on to an already stressful job, but as a way you can use the organic things that you're doing every day to get the validation and the recognition that you deserve in what is a very challenging role, and that you can earn yourself the right to have a career that is based in an industry that prides itself on a duty of care to those we serve.
Thank you. Declan, I know you're starting this journey. How do you define national standards, and what are some of the things that you're thinking about from a return to work SA perspective?
Thanks, Matt. And look, a hard act to follow in terms of just that sort of passion and understanding of national standards. But maybe to answer your question, I'll give a little bit of a history as to how we got involved. And I was just talking to Mariam earlier about when we first started talking about this, and it was around January 2022, when then a few of us met up in Sydney to talk about this. And we were going through the journey that you heard Jane Gallen talking about that sort of whole retention, attraction, and the sort of horrible turnover that we were seeing in our industry here in South Australia. And so we needed to address that to be able to actually do anything in improving our performance. So when we first met around this just really fitted in nicely with the journey we were already going on with both Gallagher, Bassett and EML. And when you stop and think about it, this is not a novel concept, not only just personal injury, but other industries. You know, there's an Australian standards body that, develops national standards. We closer to us, we've got, Safe Work that does their compliance codes. And these are things that aren't necessarily mandatory, but they're obviously very persuasive. But then if you look at different professions too, so professions like nursing and doctors and a whole range of other professions, and this is probably what makes them professions, is that they do have this set of standards that's common. And I like the words that Mariam uses around a duty of care. Now, when it comes to doctors and nurses, we're talking about public safety, but duty of care probably just sits nicely under that too. And we are dealing with people's lives, and we do have a big impact on people's lives. And to be really clear about what the attributes are, the behaviours, the learnings and the training that people need to be able to do that job, to execute that duty of care, really lends itself really nicely to this concept of national standards. And from our point of view, it was also an opportunity to come to a point where I think the industry's grown a fair bit, and a lot of us have been talking and meeting, and it's been great in terms of that exchange of ideas. But here's an opportunity I see for us to actually work on something tangible together that could be at the core of what we do nationally, to be able to start to really improve and professionalise the industry. And it's a real start for us, I think, that I see as an opportunity to grow as an industry and to professionalise it. And there's also just one other thing that, organisations like Return to Work SA, and it's probably the same for, WorkSafe and icare and WorkCover Queensland, but, Greg, you mentioned this yesterday about, we tend to get defined by the one claim here or the criticism over here, or an inquiry that looks into, the 5% of claims that may not have been managed all that effectively. But it kind of ignores all the really good work. And I think the National Professional Standards is that vehicle, I think, to kind of be able to define exactly what we do and how we do it and what we expect of our people. And I kind of see it as being something that actually makes it a bit more defensible for us when we're facing these sorts of inquiries and criticisms as well. But as an industry, we have a code, we have a practice, we have standards. And we're not just some, loose rabble that kind of comes up and just recruits people randomly to do this. We've really thought through what we need to do to actually assist our customers. So I see it as a really broader, bigger piece of work that will actually bring the country together, but also professionalise the industry. And I think Adam said last night too from Sarah that, sometimes we feel embarrassed to say what we do at barbecues, I work in workers' comp, so you say I'll work for government or I'll work for insurance or whatever it is. But it would be nice to say in 10 years' time, I work in workers' comp and I'm really proud of what we do. And we are a professional industry, and we attract people and we develop them, and they have really clear career paths. And we're celebrating that as opposed to somehow being a little bit embarrassed by that too. So when we met in January, to me, I instantly could see the value in this national approach. And having said that, I really want to hear too if people are against that as well, because sometimes we can be blinded by our own biases, but really looking forward to hearing the alternative view on this as well.
Great segue. Thanks. Declan. So look, pros and cons. I think when we're having this debate, having this conversation, it's important to be able to go through and bring in those various perspectives. So look, there's risks and benefits attached to adopting a national standard. So we're going to go through a couple of panel members now to be able to explore their views and their perspectives on this. So Stephanie, let's start with you. Risks, benefits, pros, cons. What are your views on that?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm certainly supportive of the national standards, similar to most of you in the audience. I think not many fundamental risks, I think, from my perspective, perhaps more challenges, I would say. I think naturally we celebrate our differences, and that's not just in work. I think we do that in life. We tell our kids, you know, your differences are what make you special. And so I think that that's where we naturally focus. We all think we're special in each of our jurisdictions or our employers. So I think that's where we need to flip this a little bit and lean into our similarities, which I think is not necessarily easy. And I think that along the journey, and Mariam and Declan certainly would have experienced this probably back in January, where it was easy to get caught up in the language of, we call it PIEF, we call it AWEs, it's a step down, it's a reduction. And I think that that's where the conversation started in terms of the barriers. I think we as a collective smaller working group have perhaps moved past that. However, the broader industry and probably people in this room, I think it might be a little bit one step forward, two steps back until we can really get everybody on that. But I think it is upon us to bring people on the journey that we have perhaps already worked through. In terms of the benefits, a few from me, I think and we spoke about this at the workshop recently, that it really provides our staff with a clear direction. On one of the panels earlier, we spoke about the fact that there are so many critical functions of the case management role, and what this does is it gives you set standards with only a few key competencies under that, and I think that that really gives that direction to our staff that if you can build these competencies, you can be confident in your role, and what then comes from that is increased job satisfaction, increased retention, not just for our organisation, but for our industry, but most importantly, we are people trying to help people, right? And I think that ultimately all of that then leads to better outcomes for our injured workers.
Right. Mariam, what are your views from a risks and benefits perspective?
I will do my very best to give you an unbiased view. But I really do mean that sincerely. And I guess it's not a personal view. I just want to start off by saying that. I obviously have my own personal view, but so much of what I'm going to share with you now is really based on the face-to-face consultation that I've been very privileged to lead over the past 18 months. And we're talking upwards of 163 hours across the scheme of face-to-face consultation, looking at over 898 data points, 32 engagement sessions. So I feel that it is a real privilege and an honour to be able to share the insights that have come out of those sessions. And I have also been educated by these sessions, so it has really helped to shape my personal view on this. From the benefits side, I see that there are obvious benefits to an injured and unwell public, because it means that it doesn't matter who I call. I have an expectation that I'm going to get the same service. I sort of call it the McDonald's effect. It doesn't matter which McDonald's you go to. You know that when you order this, it's going to taste like that. And that's what we want. We understand that our portfolios are complex, they're very different. We have complex variables that are impacting the way in which our injured people interact with us at times, and that can be extraordinarily challenging. So what that means is that there's a double ownership of having the right consistent experience for the person involved in the claim, but also having the right consistent experience for the employee. The employee that deserves to be trained on the specific skills and competencies that is going to enable them, to empower them to do the very best job that they can do. That is the equilibrium. And if you don't have that, then you can't expect a consistent result with an inconsistent investment. That doesn't make any sense for anybody. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is making sure that from a business lens, we think about how do we pool our resources. So already for icare, because we have that agreement around the competencies and the standards, when we share our learning around this, and Nadine spoke to the 70-20-10 model in the last plenary session. 70-20-10 is a very well-respected adult learning model. It is certainly the one that icare has adopted. It's important to note that from an operationalisation perspective, we are not prescriptive at all. But what we do is provide a model. We provide recommendations. We provide the list of learnings that we have that we will share with our scheme to reduce the gap down of what they may need to curate from scratch. And that includes any shared vendors that we have where we say, we feel that these LinkedIn learning courses would be great for these standards and for these competencies. They've already been mapped for you. If you have access to it, please feel free to use it, and so on. So it becomes very pragmatic. It becomes very commercially viable as a business not to have to serve 6 masters, but to be able to pool your resources with your scheme for your portfolio and to do the things that work for you. That does not dilute your competitive edge one iota. If anything, it gives you leave to be more creative and to funnel more of your resources into the things that is your IP, which is your culture. And your cultural IP is one of the more valuable things that you have. So if you're sharing your 10% of learning, you still have your other 90 that you can infuse your distinctive corporate flavour. So I think from the injured person and unwell person perspective, there are umpteen advantages. For the business, there are umpteen advantages. But for the person who is behind the call and giving the service, that person is, I think, the person that sometimes gets a little neglected in this conversation, because we are so focused on delivering a wonderful claim experience, sometimes we can forget that there's a person delivering that wonderful claim experience, and we have to take the social responsibility to provide them with a community where they belong. And the first thing for belonging is language. So where is the common language, the benchmark that has been industry-led, made for me and by me, that I can lean into? And if I have that, then it'll help me know where I'm going, and it'll help me validate my career and my choices.
And finally, Declan, what about your views as you've been going through your processes and examining this?
Look, I suppose both Steph and Mariam have really articulated a lot of the benefits and risks. I'll only add that one of the things we do need to avoid is just groupthink, and that this sounds like a good idea and we all move to it without actually understanding how this aligns to our organisational goals across our different organisations, and being really clear about that. And only through that process do you really understand the value of the framework and the standards. The other thing is that the last thing we want, and this has come up a few times in our conversations and workshops, is an inflexible framework that doesn't move with the times and changing community standards. And again, this is all about the people that serve the community, and if it becomes so inflexible that it becomes outdated, then it's also going to be of little value. And I suppose the final thing for me is that the final piece for me is just making sure that we do this in a way that we've all got current businesses that are operating, that we don't start to force these things on so they become a real heavy burden and compliance regime. Because I think what is a constructive framework and approach will become something that we detest and our people will detest. And so it's the art of how we implement this and how quickly or slowly we do it and how we sell it, I think, is going to be the real important thing. Otherwise, it will just become another compliance regime, and we've all got plenty of those. And we've been spending a lot of time trying to unwind a lot of that, and we still have a lot of it. We just don't need another level of compliance pass-fail.
On that, once again, great segue. Kim, I might hand over to you. So from a CTP regulatory perspective, what are your views? Where do standards and national standards sit? What are some of the opportunities and risks and challenges that are associated with national standards through your lens as a CTP regulator?
Thanks very much. And Mariam makes me want to be a believer. Can I tell you that? Because she's so passionate and I love listening to you. I said to you that the other day when she was giving me her view and I went, oh, I'm in. I'm just in. She's got me. I think from a regulatory, I'm not representing CTP insurers. It's a shame there isn't a private sector underwritten insurer on the stage because they should be. But I will talk from my view as a regulator. So in CTP, we have 4 privately underwritten schemes. So we have 4 insurers that are competitors. And we talk about this. And one of their value propositions for recruitment is this staff that we're talking about today. And I sit in a really, any regulator staff sits in a very unique position of getting to see the details that are going on in each of these underwriting insurers. And it's some wonderful work to see. And they are doing a really great job. And they have really innovative, thoughtful, progressive capability frameworks. You could want to wrap those into calling them a standard, you could. But it's all built into their businesses. These companies are huge, you know, we know that, they're in the room. The private sector underwritten insurers, and they're also, that point that you're making, Declan, they are beating to their own company as well. And you would be quite dangerous to cut into that when it is their competitive edge and what makes their customer service rating scores shine. And they're getting feedback directly because of those things. The other thing I think about, and these are more general things, but I'll get into the regulator part in a minute, is it's just some notes I took while you were speaking, was one of the things that I think is really important is jurisdictional differences. And I'm not talking just state and territories, I'm talking about schemes within those states and territories. And I know this from working on the East Coast and coming to South Australia in 2016. This place is really different, and it's beautifully different to the East Coast. And and so with that, you have, I've learned so much about just the appreciation of understanding the environment you're working in. And the people that, and it's lovely what Mariam was talking about hearing the voice of the injured person and who benefits the most in your proposition to the standards, as do the staff, but making sure that that voice is repeated. Those sessions are repeated across the country. If you want a national standard, you've got to hear the voices of injured people. You can call them workers. Ultimately, they're people, so I'm going with my language. And there are also, and the claims experience and the staff and what their challenges are. They are different, and that's really important if you want to actually establish a national standard, in my view. The other thing I picked up was the race to the bottom, we call it, of a minimum standard risk. At the moment, I have really high-performing, high-achieving CTP underwriters, and if I ended up seeing a really minimum standard submission, because that's acceptable to the industry, it's a national, I would be really sad to see that. And it's such a loss of what I'm seeing now. The other things that I'm calling out is, we talk about the standardisation, the consistency of a standard would bring the industry. So again, as regulators, we know what's going on within our shared insurer underwriters. And so while these companies have these great systems in place, as in frameworks, etc., the capability, competency frameworks and driving to be the best in their business because they're competitors, we see jurisdictional performance differences. So it's not happening now within one company. So the expectation that a national standard is suddenly going to lift everybody is lovely to think about. But I'm telling you that what I see, and I've spoken to other regulators, we know that. We don't see the same thing happening within one company. So I don't think it's definitely going to give you the outcome that you think it will. That's my thoughts on that. And the other thing, back to being a regulator, is it's not my role to set standards. It's not my role. It's an industry role. If the CTP insurers that I regulate want to sign up to a national standard, go for it. You're welcome to. I'm not stopping you to do that. You know, they've done it before through the ICA. The General Insurance Code of Practice happened 30 years ago. The first one came out, the voluntary code. So they're very welcome to do that. But I have enough tools in the way I've structured South Australia to regulate and ensure high performing through regulator rules, you know, and insurer contracts. And these insurers are also under multiple standard expectations through ASIC, APRA, and each regulator in each jurisdiction. So the point that Declan also made about regulatory burden, I'm very mindful of that. And what would be the admin burden on these insurers to suddenly to take something on differently, and who's paying for it? Is it coming into the admin cost of insurers that motor vehicle owners have to pay for? And where am I seeing the value for that for the motorist in South Australia who's struggling? You know, maybe there is. I don't know. I'm just saying these are the things that I think about. But most importantly, my view is there's no role for a regulator. And quite rightly, in design or putting them in, it is an industry-led standard. But be mindful, if you do adopt them, regulators might be, and this is a fear of insurers, that if regulators might actually grab these things and start using them as compliance tools. And I can't, you know, that's a decision of each regulator. That's not, I don't speak for all regulators on what I would do. But my view is get out of the way of the insurers. That's how I regulate. They have guardrails as a regulator. I'm there to keep the scheme safe, keep the scheme thriving. I need thriving insurers. I need thriving injury recovery to keep this scheme performing. So that's my view as a regulator.
Thanks, Kim. All right, so I mentioned the intro around the whole notion of differentiation. So we want to get some views from some of our insurers here on the panel today. So maybe I'll start with Joanne with a question around how will the national standards support attraction of great talent into your business? You know, how will you differentiate to be able to attract and retain that amazing talent?
Sure. Look, national standards, I think, will create a great identity for our industry, and particularly with educational institutions. They may not want to link to a commercial provider or be seen to be attached to that, but if they see that it's coming from the personal injury industry, they align to that and they'll promote that. So that brings those people coming in through tertiary education into our scheme. And back to, I mean, Declan said it before, no one knows what workers' comp is. I mean, I'm probably the one who does go to a barbecue and say I'm in workers' comp, and they say, well, why would you do that? And I go in and start explaining it. And just when you're explaining it, you know, we help people after they've been injured, and who's going to do that otherwise? And we help them get back to work. People don't think of that. They're just thinking, we're cutting off payments and we're trying to decline their claims. That's what people are thinking. So no one knows all that stuff. How do we get that picture out there? I think through the national standards, we can show that and show the diversity of the role, that you really are using so many skills. And there's also that altruistic part that, you know, our generation's coming in and we're saying it's not just the younger generations, it's the older generations, want to know that the job they're doing makes a difference. It's not just a job that gets them money and security. How are they helping society and the community? I think the picture as well that it can create is that piece around how we help individuals, that injured person, but also employers, industry, then flows onto economy, and then when the economy hurts, every single one of us hurt. There's a huge impact. So I think that picture that can be created nationally is fantastic in attracting people into the industry. As far as retaining, I think I'm obviously pro the national standards, but I think my caution on it all is how we implement it and that we don't forget the purpose of it. One of my concerns is the people sitting in the scheme working for us now and how this applies to them. And if we make this overly burdensome, it's going to annoy people. And if they know that it's something applied, you know, if they come into EML, it's no use going to Gallagher Bassett, because Gallagher Bassett has to apply it as well. So I'm leaving the industry, and we want to make sure we don't do that. So I think there's definitely some attraction and some really strong pieces there, but I think there's a really important part in how we apply this, that we don't actually deter people from our industry because we make it too hard. Apart from the fact that we're sitting here saying, you're going to do this great job helping people, but half the time that you're on the job, you're being assessed and collecting evidence, and we're taking you away from your job. So it's kind of, it's that challenge of how do we build capability, but then not let them use it, because we're going to be doing all this paperwork in the background. So I think that's one of the cautions I think we've got to really think about, how we implement this so that it's there, it's supporting people, but it's not detracting from what their job is and what we want them to do, because that's something we want to be very protective of, is that we get caseloads down so that people can do a really good job in helping people return to work, return to life, and then we seem to fill it with all this other stuff and they've got more work to do. So we need to be careful on that part.
Thank you. And Stephanie, your view from a GB perspective?
I'll probably just complement that with the differentiation component. I think that what's come through this is potentially concern around competitive advantage, and I think, Kim, you had previously mentioned this and what that looks like in a discussion we had. And I think that competitive tension has probably inhibited the progression of some of these things historically, and that information sharing. And I think we've really come a long way in the last 12 to 18 months as an industry in doing that. We're certainly seeing that through these conferences. And certainly not to diminish the standards at all, Mariam, but I think that they are just, and you've said this, they're minimum standard. It's just one component of what we do. How we choose to train our staff, how we choose to implement, deliver what training material we build. To your point, you don't necessarily design all of that, and we can choose how we do that. Pete said yesterday on the panel that we have case management school, we have claims academies. How insurers, TPAs choose to do that is upon us, I think, and I think that can give us that competitive advantage, whether it's around a hybrid learning model, whether it's around phasing caseloads, whether it's caseloads generally. We heard from Jane before and what happened in Return to Work SA when the agents started to reduce those caseloads. Never mind our service delivery model, support functions, innovation, decision support tools. There's so much more that can give us that competitive advantage, and I really just think that the standards are something that, complement what we do.
Great answer. So any framework, any standards, any system all comes to how well it's operationalised. Having a national standards, is that going to hinder, is that going to support? Joanne, I might throw to you to see what your views on that are from an operationalisation perspective?
Yeah, I think the things that we're really seeing in New South Wales as we're preparing to implement this is between all the providers, we're in some different places. And, we've got some very, very comprehensive programs that we put people through and really great support networks. And that has supported us over the recent years in really improving our capability and retention. And we don't want to undo that by having to put something in over the top of. It needs to become part of it. And that's where we've been working really closely with icare around how do we just continue the great stuff we're doing, but make sure that's in there as well. So making sure they become part of what we do. And part of what we do is really important because our programs, our EML Grow and EML Way that we have, it's entrenched right throughout the whole business. It's not just about a training program, it's built into our processes, our delegations, our remuneration program. It's part of our business. So we don't want to undo that. We just want to make sure that we're completing at the same time. And again, to the point I was saying before, the biggest part is how do we make sure that our case managers are getting the right support without it being too much of a burden? Because we want them to do, really, a really good assessment is about on the job, 70-20-10, it's the on the job. That's where we actually see the evidence. So let them do the job and we have to find the best ways to be able to pick it out from there. So I think that's going to be the key, is how do we find the easiest way to do some form of assessment, because we need to have evidence so that it's got some rigour and these standards have some value. But we don't want to do it for the sake of ticking boxes and having lots of checks and balances, because it's kind of a... I just think it's the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. You know, we're trying to get people back to work and get people on the phone so they can talk to people and get those outcomes. But then we take them off the phones to do this stuff to build the capability for them to do it. It's contradictory. So I think the operationalisation for us is really about how we build it into what already exists, help them just get their job done, and while they're doing the job, we've got some ways of actually pulling it out. If technology could do that for us, as we talk about all the technology earlier, that'd be amazing. I think we're not quite there yet, but if that can come into the picture, that would be fabulous, because they're the kinds of things that would just, while they're doing something, they tick a box and go, submit this. It'd make it very happy, but they're the kinds of things that would really help in the future.
And Stephanie, anything to add from your perspective in operationalising?
Maybe a little bit of a different perspective, but more so in the sense that I think that the national standards would probably further support some of the work we're already doing internally at GB. We've had a very intentional strategy, probably over the last 12 months, to follow a similar trajectory, more so in breaking down those silos across our operations nationally. And what that has meant is we've gone on a really specific path of mutual discovery across our different business units in personal injury. And what that has led to for us is really accelerating key programs of work, because again, we're finding we are more alike than different, and especially in our own way, but that's been really, really helpful for us. So I think that the standards only further complement what we're doing in that space. And secondly, and probably Mariam, you spoke about this before, in terms of pooling of resources, I think from a technical training and capability development perspective, it will really help with our team in that regard. Rather than so many different training programs, we can have a little bit more holistic with the dedicated piece for the jurisdictional and legislative differences.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, great questions come through that I think links to the next topic, which is we've been talking about this for over a decade around national standards, and we have yet to get it right. So Declan, from your view, what is needed for us to be able to get it right this time? What's going to make this time different?
I think in the past it's been a lot of goodwill and conversation, and I suppose when you're relying on goodwill and conversation, you don't really move forward once you reach a certain point of consensus. I think initially we need a body like PIEF, who's already been the body that's kind of helping to coordinate the discussions around this. I think then once we've agreed on what that body is, that is going to be that coordinating body, it's about understanding how deep we go with this as an industry. So the whole national standards is comprised of a number of elements, and at the top level you've got the standards, and then you have the competencies that sit below it and the proficiency levels and so on. And I think, and there's a whole way of measuring that and so on. It's how deep we want to go as an industry, and I think initially we're going to have to really stay at that high level and move sort of horizontally across that to understand the implications of it. And then once we've got that coordinating body and we really understand where we sit in terms of how deep we want to go with this, I think each organisation then needs to understand what I said before, how does this map to your organisational goals, and how relevant is it to your business or your jurisdiction or your scheme? Because if you don't do that, then this is a pointless exercise, and I think we get that groupthink, as we said before. And part of this too is what Steph mentioned about, and it's amazing how we can get caught up in semantics, but sort of moving beyond the semantics and starting to look at what we already have, because you might actually find, if you remove the semantics, that you're probably 80 to 90% of the way there anyway. And we've already started doing a bit of work in South Australia to kind of map where we sit against it, so both with Gallagher, Bassett and EML, and where we've got the gaps. And I think we are roughly around about that 80 to 90%. And some of it is semantics. And I know, Mariam, in New South Wales, you talk about empowered leadership, and we just say empowered people. You know what I mean? It's the same thing, really, just with a different word in there. So it's every organisation in understanding the relevance to their own, as I say, organisational goals, their scheme goals, and those sorts of things as well. But I think we just need that someone to be able to help coordinate us and get us and move us along the journey on this, and trying to keep it as simple as possible is where we need to start.
Mm-hmm. Kim, your view around what will be needed to successfully implement national standards?
Well, I think you need a call to action. What is it? What is the standard solving? What is the issue that's common across every jurisdiction to get the connection through to every jurisdiction on what it's going to provide? I think what is the issue you're solving is something that needs to be very clear. I think you've then got to really think about what are the consequences of not having a national standard, and what are the alternatives. How else could you do it? So you really got to stop the groupthink and get lots of different voices and views in the room to challenge. And you really got to make it gritty and really accept and really throw around all of those things to see if you can find consensus. Mm-hmm. Because without consensus, you can't have a national standard. And what does consensus mean? How many insurers, if it's an industry, and I call you all insurers, whether you're government underwritten or privately underwritten, how many do you need to get over the line to call it national? Who decides that? How's that done? So I think getting really clear, getting that clarity and bringing everyone along on the cell. And then there has to be rigour. You know, I'm using my old, this is policy development here, 101, but the rigour. What is your evidence base? What is the current literature? We've heard so much about the future. Will this standard stack up in 5 years' time? Are you stretching it? Is it a real stretch standard rather than just taking what we know now? You know, and how are you, the bit about speaking to avatars. I mean, that blew my mind, but that's okay. So what does that look like? And are you thinking about that? So there is some rigour that stands up on that. I've talked about jurisdictional differences that you need to think about. Benefits, cost benefit. This is a big one for me. The admin burden, the effort, the busyness that insurers can have, very busy, but what is it actually delivering? And being really hard on yourselves to get that clear, what that is. And then we talk about, well, I've mentioned competition, but what is the impacts on competition from the perspective of, well, the underwriters? And translation, practicality, how's it going to work? You talk about accrediting and setting tests. I mean, who decides the tests? Who's running the tests? How qualitative are they? Are they hard metrics? Is it just become easy just to tick the boxes and yeehaw, you're accredited? So it's worth nothing really, because everyone will get accredited. So what does that look like? And it becomes an administrative process that someone's making money out of to manage that or administer it, or unless it's going to be done for free by someone. These are the things, these cost benefits must be thought through, and about what that impact is. Who's reviewing it? How will that be reviewed? What's the governance over that to actually stand it up? Mm-hmm. Some ideas and thoughts about things you need to think about to get it over the line from a regulator.
Great, great. Really conscious of time. We're getting the little red flag and getting the wind up. But it would be remiss not to lead to what's next. There's a national conversation about this. It's underway. Mariam, your views, what's next? How can people get involved in the conversation to progress this forward?
Well, you can see that there are panel members here that already are on board with professional standards. There is a subcommittee that has been formed by PIEF's board to discuss the national standards. So my strongest encouragement would be that if you want to bring something to that table, please get in touch with Noel and his team in your own state. So you'll have Return to Work South Australia, WorkSafe Victoria, WorkCover Queensland, ACT, even other schemes, Comcare as an example. Every regulator is involved, and also all of the major personal injury insurers are involved. So if you're keen to learn more, to be part of it, please do. If you're keen to actually see the current professional standards, which is applicable only in New South Wales, please feel welcome to jump on icare's website where you can download your copy.
Thank you. Well, I think that's it. Can we get a round of applause for this amazing panel?